20 years ago, I built this brick oven out of fire brick and stone. Rather than continually to repair the cracks, I've decided to give it a fresh update using Buddy Rhodes Vertical Mix. We've showcased the Vertical Mix in other various projects. Now I'm excited to use it on my own personal project. Well, let's get started. I chose to refurbish the brick oven with a blanket of Vertical Mix as a more permanent repair. This obviously adds a cost, but would be recouped after not having to perform the annual repair of the mortar joints. Vertical Mix can be colored and textured to accommodate many different design themes. It is also making the brick oven more thermally efficient through the lightweight aggregate. We started by constructing a raised platform to extend the deck area, which will enable us to access all of the sides. This will minimize the need for a ladder. Since there is a large crack that runs vertical in the firebox region, I know there would be movement in this area when the oven is heated. I wanted to limit the expansion and keep the crack under control. I decided to wrap a braided stainless steel cable around the entire oven for this purpose. I am not sure if this was necessary, but I just didn't see a downside to it either. We used cable clamps to secure the cable together. I had some FRP rod or fiberglass rebar and cut short sections to place under the cable at various locations, distributing the force over a greater area. We tightened the cable with the use of a turnbuckle. In my original brick oven design, I looked into insulation, but due to its size constraints, I decided against it. This omission not only contributed to the cracking issue, but the oven was not very thermally efficient. When using in colder months, I would need to refire every few pizzas. I added insulation in the areas directly outside of the heat zones. We measured the area for insulation and cut each piece to size. I went with 1-inch thick ceramic mat insulation. This may be overkill for my application, but this is the correct material to use when insulating over fire brick. This particular material is rated at 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now with the insulation in place, we wrap the entire oven in spider lath. Spider lath is an AR glass fiber grid with foam strips that act as standoffs for concrete to flow around, leaving the grid perfectly embedded where it needs to be. This will be the structural layer that the Vertical Mix will be applied to. I decided to use glass lath instead of metal to eliminate shrinkage cracks caused from the concrete shrinking over a large area. The lath is easily cut with scissors. We allowed the shape to hold the lath in position and joined sections with one another with plastic cable ties. I removed any openings by cutting with scissors. The oven opening I folded back to give structure for the sides of the opening. Wherever necessary, use concrete fasteners to secure the lath in place. Continue this process until the spider lath installation is complete. Now that we've prepared our base, we've set up this workstation and we're ready to start applying our Vertical Mix scratch coat. Let's get started. We started by weighing our water and ramp and adding it to our mixing vessel. Using a Sharpie, I drew a reference line on the container to speed the mixing process by eliminating the need to weigh each time. We decided to mix 2 bag batches, so twice the water and ramp. We then added the Buddy Rhodes Vertical Mix 1 bag at a time and blended until homogeneous. I applied the Vertical Mix by hand, spreading it over and into the lath. Notice the lath is not rigid and care must be taken to ensure you are properly covering to about 3/4 of an inch. I use a pull trowel to level the material to a uniform thickness. After a section of material is applied, use a rake to create horizontal grooves into the material while it is still wet and in its plastic state. These will provide attachment crevices for the final texture coat. Continue this process until all areas are covered. For the foundation area, I removed any dirt and loose material with a wire brush. I then thoroughly saturated the base with a ramp and water 50-50 mix. This will allow the Vertical Mix to permanently bond to the surface without the need for the structural lath. While the surface is still damp, I applied the vertical mix by spreading it onto the surface in troweling uniform. I masked off the ash cleanout door with duct tape in order to remove any material that may become stuck to this area. I wire brushed the loose material, sprayed the surface with ramp and water 50-50 mix, and applied vertical mix and raked the material in order to provide mechanical bonding for the next coat. I used a pre-mixed refractory mortar to make repairs in areas that see extreme heat, like the flue and at the opening of the brick oven. Once done, we allowed all the materials to cure until the next day.
Okay, the scratch coat is completely dry, and since I'm going to be carving this whole project myself, I decided to apply the texture coat over 2 days. But first I need to remove any loose material and prime the surface with ramp.
Using a margin trowel, I removed any loose material by dragging it across the surface. I put ramp and water 50-50 in a pump-up sprayer and sprayed the surface, saturating it in preparation of the vertical mix. Since it was hot and the surface needs to be wet while applying the vertical mix, Ernie began mixing the material following the same procedure as the scratch coat. We weighed out our water and dispensed the ramp and placed them into our mixing vessel. We added 1 bag of vertical mix and blended well. We added the second bag and blended until homogeneous. I now can apply the vertical mix texture coat by throwing or firmly spreading it onto the pre-wet primed surfaces. Using a pull trowel, I spread to unify the applied material while creating some textured irregularities. These will become natural stone variations in the final carved design. Using a little water spray on the trowel aids in smoothing this application. Continue to prime the surfaces that have dried with the ramp and water mixture before applying the vertical mix. For this project, I used a mason's brush that had hardened concrete on it to give it a pockmarked texture to this project. I used Buddy Rhodes stamp and roller release when texturing with this tool. I sprayed the brush lightly and dabbed it into the surface of the newly applied vertical mix. Since this project was outside, I needed to jump around to determine what areas were ready to receive the texture and which areas that were not. This process continued, priming the surface with ramp, troweling uniform the applied material, and stamping the texture as it becomes ready to do so. At the end of the application of the first day's carving material, I started developing the stone pattern. This is done gradually as some areas may be still too wet and others may be just right. I removed the excess material from the cleanout door as it will be much more difficult to do so later. I continued cutting the pattern from the bottom up. I scarified the areas where I would be adding new material tomorrow to assist in bonding this material to the new material, similar to a scratch coat. As the material becomes more firm, the detail can be defined. A margin trowel and a chip brush were the tools of choice today. Before the end of the day, I dug out and removed the tape from the cleanout door. The fibers in the duct tape really make this process easy. We paused here for the day to allow the vertical mix to cure.
All right, here we are, day 2 of the carve application. As you can see, we don't have a straight line. That's something you want to keep in mind if you're doing a project over multiple days. That way you can work the transition in seamlessly. Let's get mixing some mud.
We added the water and ramp to the mixing vessel and added the vertical mix and blended well. Since we were starting on the front side of the oven today in direct sunlight, we only mixed single bags of vertical mix. I applied the ramp primer to saturate the scratch coat and began tossing the material and working it onto the surface. Using a pull trowel, I spread the material, creating natural stone shapes and textured when necessary, using stamp and roller release. For the hearth area, I chose to stamp the stone texture to give a smoother result than the divots the brush would create. This will be more practical when cleaning the ash from the oven. I used a Moldstar 16 fast texture skin and Buddy Rhodes stamp and roller release to provide the texture. For more information on making texture skins, please visit Smooth On's website. Because it was so hot this day, I only applied the ramp primer a few minutes in front of the vertical mix application. I again used the texture skin along with the stamp and roller release on the top flat areas of the oven. If you notice, the refractory patch material has shrunk and left a few cracks from when I applied to the flue area. I will fill the cracks with more of the same Ladle Lock 3000 patch material. I really enjoyed the benefit of an umbrella for the detail carving. It was at least 20 degrees cooler under there, so keep this in mind for larger projects. A canopy would be beneficial in reducing the sun's impact on the concrete setting.
Okay, here we are, color day. But before I get started, I'm going to have to do some detailing of the joints with a diamond grinder and burn visible fibers.
I encountered an area that I missed when carving and used the diamond blade on an angle grinder to carve these joints the next day. We also used brick chisels to help add some detail to the joints. Even though the vertical mix is hard, you can open up some areas to make more rugged and distressed looking. While you can make subtle changes the next day, in as little as another 24 hours, only diamond tools would be capable of making additional changes. Diamond pads or carbide tools can also add to the look. I found a brass brush worked well to get the areas between the stones cleaned out. The vertical mix contains small reinforcing fibers which provide structural integrity to the material. After carving, they may be visible, but can simply be melted away with a propane torch. My good friend Ernie jumped at the chance to torch the fibers. After all the detail work was completed, we blew off the project in preparation of coloring. I used multiple different base colors of the Buddy Rhodes Glazes mixed with ramp and water in various dilutions. Buddy Rhodes Glazes are very translucent. By adding a mixture of ramp and water, I was able to give more body and opacity to the coloring, further locking them onto the surface. I started coloring at the top, and again, since it was hot, I sprayed the project with water to cool the surface and dilute the color. This technique will allow the color to move and provide a more natural variation. If I didn't perform this step, the color will set entirely too fast and look manufactured, not realistic. The coloring process is to apply various tones in layers, always being careful to dab runs and not apply too much too fast. I like using water as a tool for manipulating the color into crevices and details. This creates a natural appearance. I utilized a few shades of gray, brown, and green to start and sprayed and sponged them in layers over the entire project. Because of the wet and dry factor, I took my time and occasionally stood back to gather a different perspective. After I had a base color, I started adding highlights with variations of white and reddish brown, always keeping water handy to dilute and deposit naturally. Faux sponging followed by a water spray to distribute is an easy technique to color any natural stone. After multiple applications of the color, I paused here to allow the color to dry completely in order to see the actual color value when dry. After the project was colored, I sanded the high areas using a diamond hand pad. This brings out the base color concrete and adds a nice contrast through accents. I used white glaze to add some highlights to mimic calcium and quartz deposits. I followed this with some iron deposits using a combination of red and yellow glaze. I attempted some lichen by mixing a pale green color and added some ECC blended mix to make a paste and applied with an artist brush. Green highlights washed with water resemble moss between the stones. With white and the correct fan spray, you can produce a perfect speckle pattern similar to granite. The coloring is now complete. We must allow at least 1 week for the vertical mix to fully cure before burning the first fire.
So now that this project is almost complete, I'm really happy with the results so far. There's just one thing left to do. Let's make some pizza.
After using it a few times and burning a few pizzas, I'd say the oven is more energy efficient and will require less fuel for cooking anything. The vertical mix was a good choice, and I'm really happy with how this project turned out.